a young nurse, started her first night shift at Greenwood Memorial Hospital. It was an old building, nearly empty due to ongoing renovations, with most patients transferred to other facilities. Maya was assigned to watch over a few patients in the West Wing. The dim lighting in the hospital hallways made the long, empty corridors feel like endless tunnels. As she approached the nurse's station, her footsteps echoed in the silence. There she found Jeff, an older, experienced nurse with a tired smile. "First night shift?" he asked, yawning as he glanced at her. "Yes," Maya said, trying to sound calm. "Any advice?" Jeff chuckled softly. "Just one. Stay away from room 207. She raised an eyebrow, thinking he was joking, but his expression was unreadable. Before she could ask more, the lights flickered above them, and the radio in the corner hissed with static. Maya tried to shake off the unease, telling herself it was just nerves, but something felt wrong in this hospital, and the mention of room 207 lingered in her mind. Later, as she began her rounds, she moved down the quiet, dimly lit hallway. She checked on each patient, pausing for a moment outside of room 207. Its door was slightly ajar, even though it was supposed to be locked. A chill ran down her spine, and she swore she heard faint whispers coming from inside. Her name echoed softly, like a breath caught in the walls. For a moment, she convinced herself it was her imagination, but the whisper came again, a chilling voice barely louder than a whisper. Summoning her courage, she pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. The room was dark and empty, a faint smell of antiseptic lingering in the stale air. On the bed, she noticed something small and crumpled a piece of paper. Reaching for it, she saw words scribbled in shaky handwriting. "Help me. He won't leave." Stumbled back, feeling a surge of fear. She hurried back to the nurse's station and found Jeff, who was leaning back with his eyes closed. "Jeff," she whispered urgently, "there's something in room 207. I heard. Someone was whispering my name." Jeff opened one eye, watching her with a tired expression. "This place plays tricks on you, especially at night. It's just an old, creaky building. Don't let it get to you, Maya." But she couldn't shake the feeling. She tried to convince herself that Jeff was right, that her imagination was playing tricks on her, but every time she passed room 207, she felt a strange, oppressive energy. The shadows seemed darker, and the air felt colder near that door. The strange occurrences only grew more intense. Maya began seeing fleeting shadows out of the corner of her eye, and felt a constant sensation of being watched. Once, while checking on Mrs. Delaney, an elderly woman with pneumonia in room 209, she noticed Mrs. Delaney staring blankly at the ceiling, her eyes wide with terror. "Mrs. Delaney, are you all right?" Maya asked, concerned. The old woman's gaze remained fixed on the ceiling. "They come every night," she whispered in a shaky voice. Watching. It was empty, and the ceiling was just a dull white. As she moved closer to Mrs. Delaney, she felt a strange, icy breeze brush against her, even though the windows were closed. "Who comes, Mrs. Delaney?" Maya asked softly. But Mrs. Delaney only turned her head slowly, her eyes wide with fear, and whispered, "The man in the shadows." Maya left the room quickly, her skin prickling with a strange sense of dread. She told herself it was just a story, a strange old woman's imagination, but the words haunted her as she continued her rounds. Around 3 a.m., Maya walked down the main hallway when suddenly, the power flickered, leaving her in near darkness. Only the faint green emergency lights remained, casting eerie shadows along the walls. The silence was broken by soft whispers again, faint at first, but growing louder, as if they were following her. She looked over her shoulder, heart racing, but saw nothing except the long, empty corridor stretching behind her. The whispers continued, growing closer and clearer. Then she heard her name again, spoken in a breathy voice that made her blood run cold. "Maya." Panicked, she hurried back to the nurse's station, where she found Jeff dozing lightly. She shook his shoulder, and he opened his eyes, looking at her with an amused smile. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something is in this hospital," she whispered, her voice shaking. "There's someone or something in room 207. Jeff's face softened. "There's a story about that room, you know," he began, sounding reluctant. "A man named Henry Fisher died there years ago. He kept telling everyone that he saw shadows, that there was a figure in the corner of the room, whispering to him. The doctors thought he was delusional, but he was terrified. When he died, some people started saying that Henry's spirit lingered. They say he couldn't leave, because the shadow wouldn't let." The chill in Maya's spine deepened. What? What happened to him? Jeff shrugged, but his voice was tense. He was found dead, sitting up in bed, his eyes wide open, like he'd seen something horrible. "The note you found? Other nurses have found similar notes in that room. Most of them don't stay after that." Maya's breath came faster. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "People here just try not to talk about it," Jeff said. "And most of the time, nothing happens. It's an old building after all." But Maya could see that Jeff didn't fully believe his own words. She stayed silent, but fear gnawed at her, and she knew she wouldn't be able to ignore it. Later, as she walked down the hall, she saw a tall, dark figure standing at the far end of the hallway, facing her. The figure had no face, only a vague, shadowy outline, as if it were made of darkness itself. "Maya!" The voice echoed down the hall. She froze, unable to move as the figure began to approach, its steps slow and deliberate. Every fiber of her being screamed to run, but her legs felt like stone. As it drew closer, she felt a cold wave wash over her, as if the very air around her had frozen. Suddenly, the figure stopped, vanishing into the shadows. Maya gasped, stumbling back, feeling as if she had just escaped something terrible. She found herself standing outside room 207, the door slightly open, and a strange, overwhelming urge drew her inside. Trembling, she stepped in and shut the door behind her, leaning against it as she tried to calm her racing heart. The room was cold, and she felt a heavy presence lurking in the darkness. Then she heard it again, that whispering voice. It was no longer faint, it was right beside her, in her ear. "You will stay here, forever." In a panic, Maya ran out of the room and down the hallway, her footsteps echoing as she fled. She stumbled into the staff room, her heart pounding as she tried to catch her breath. Desperate, she rummaged through the old files and found Henry Fisher's file. His last entry was a scribbled note. "He won't let me go." Maya closed her eyes, feeling an overwhelming sadness. The shadow wasn't just haunting people, it was trapping them. She didn't know what she could do, but she couldn't leave knowing it might never stop. She whispered, "Henry, you don't have to stay here. You can leave." The air around her grew warm, and for a moment, she felt as if a heavy weight had lifted from the room. A sense of calm filled her, and the whispers faded. It was as if Henry had finally found peace. The next morning, Maya told Jeff everything. Surprisingly, he listened quietly, his usual humor absent. "Room 207 has always been different," he admitted, "but maybe now it can finally be at peace." Memorial. Maya looked back at the hospital, feeling both relief and sorrow. She knew she'd never forget that night or the voices in the shadows. Maya started her first night shift at Greenwood Memorial Hospital, a place that seemed to hold its age in every shadowed corner and echoing hall. Though recently renovated in parts, the hospital felt old, with creaking floors, flickering lights, and hallways that seemed to stretch out longer than they should. Only a few patients remained in the west wing where Maya had been assigned, as most rooms were either empty or closed off. The calm felt too quiet, unnervingly so, and an anxious energy filled Maya's chest. Reaching the nurse's station, she met her night shift partner, Jeff, an older, slightly cynical nurse who had worked there for years. Jeff gave her a nod, his eyes weary but kind. "First night shift?" he asked, glancing over as he sipped a mug of cold coffee. Maya forced a smile, trying to shake her nerves. "Yes. Any advice?" Jeff chuckled softly, a strange glint in his eye. "Just one. Stay away from room 207. A chill ran through Maya, but she tried to laugh it off. "Why?" He shook his head, a small smile flickering before his face went blank. Before Maya could ask more, the overhead lights flickered and the radio at the desk crackled with static, hissing for a moment before falling silent. She shivered, chalking it up to nerves and old wiring. But something about the way Jeff stared off toward the dark hallway made her wonder if he wasn't serious. As she went about her rounds, the sense of unease grew. The hospital was dim, each hallway lit only by the soft glow of low-wattage bulbs. The shadows seemed to follow her as she moved, and her footsteps echoed in the empty corridors. The first few rooms were quiet, their patients sound asleep, and Maya was almost starting to relax. 107, she felt the hairs on her neck stand up. The door was slightly ajar, even though the room was supposed to be locked. A faint, chilling whisper drifted out into the hallway, so soft she wondered if she had imagined it. Maya. Her heart skipped. She told herself she was just hearing things, but the whisper came again, this time clear enough to make her spine tingle. It was her name. Fighting the instinct to run, she reached out and pushed the door open. Her breath caught in her throat. The room was empty, dark except for a faint light from the window. Everything was in its place, but the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Her eyes landed on something on the bed, a small, crumpled piece of paper. She walked over and picked it up, squinting in the dim light to read the words scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Help me. He won't leave." She stumbled back, clutching the note, as a rush of cold fear flooded her. The walls felt like they were closing in, and she bolted from the room, nearly tripping over her own feet in her haste. She hurried back to the nurse's station, where Jeff was flipping through a magazine, looking half asleep. "Jeff, there's something," she whispered, her voice shaking. "In room 207. I heard. Someone was whispering my name, and I found this note on the bed." Jeff glanced up, eyes shadowed with an unreadable expression. "You're letting this place get to you, Maya. This hospital, it can play tricks on your mind, especially at night." But the look in his eyes suggested he knew more than he was letting on. But she tried to explain, but he just shook his head, giving her a pitying smile. "Just avoid that room, all right? It's better that way." As she returned to her rounds, Maya couldn't shake the strange sensation that something in the hospital was watching her. The dark corners seemed to hold secrets, and every flicker of the lights felt like an omen. Room 207 lingered in her mind, and no matter how much she tried to focus, the whispers and shadows nagged at her senses. Hours passed, and Maya's fear grew sharper. While checking on Mrs. Delaney, an elderly woman in room 209, she noticed the old woman staring intently at the ceiling, her mouth slightly open, eyes wide with terror. "Are you all right?" Maya asked, worried. Mrs. Delaney didn't move her gaze. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They are here. They come every night." Maya followed her gaze, staring up at the dull white ceiling. There was nothing there, only the soft hum of the overhead lights. But a strange, icy draft brushed against her, raising goosebumps along her arms. "Who, Mrs. Delaney?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. The woman finally looked at her, her face pale and trembling. The man in the shadows. Chilled, Maya left the room, her mind racing with questions and fear. She tried to focus on her duties, but every empty room, every flicker of light, and every soft sound in the hall felt like it was meant for her. Even the silence seemed to carry a weight, an invisible presence pressing down on her. Around 3 in the morning, Maya was walking down a long hallway when suddenly the power flickered and the lights dimmed, leaving only the green emergency lights glowing in the corners. The silence was heavy, broken only by a faint, distant whisper that seemed to travel through the walls. "Maya." She whipped around, heart pounding. The hall stretched out behind her, empty and quiet. But she could feel a presence, a cold, unyielding energy pressing down on her. The voice whispered her name again, and this time it sounded closer, like someone was standing right behind her. She forced herself to keep walking, each step feeling heavier as she reached the nurse's station. Jeff was absent, probably somewhere in the back, and she felt entirely alone. The whispers continued, growing louder, each one laced with a menacing undertone. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the entire building was breathing down her neck. A sudden sound, a faint creak, caught her attention. She looked toward the end of the hallway, her breath hitching as she saw a shadow move in the darkness. It was faint, but it was there, a tall, dark figure, its shape blurry and undefined, as if it were made of shadows themselves. The figure took a step toward her, and she froze, her body refusing to move. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. It called her name again, each syllable stretched out, taunting, as if it enjoyed her fear. Then, in a blink, it vanished, leaving only the oppressive silence in its wake. Maya barely slept the next day, haunted by the figure and the whispers that wouldn't leave her mind. She considered quitting, calling it a sign to find a different job. But when night fell again, she found herself back at the hospital, her nerves frayed, but her curiosity stronger than her fear. She started her rounds once more, trying to ignore the oppressive silence that settled around her like a dark cloud. Every time she passed room 207, she felt an icy breeze, and the air grew heavy, almost suffocating. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, Maya decided to search the hospital's records. In the staff room, she dug through old files, looking for anything connected to room 207. At last, she found a file labeled Henry Fisher. A cold chill ran through her as she read the details. Henry had been a patient who had claimed he was being haunted by a man in the shadows. Nurses and doctors had dismissed him as delusional, but his terror had been real. He was found dead one night, his face frozen in an expression of horror. And like the note Shed found, had left a final scrawled message, "He won't let me go." Suddenly, a loud bang echoed in the hallway, making her jump. She glanced out of the staff room, heart pounding. The door to room 207 was wide open, though she was certain Shed left it closed. Her hand trembled as she approached the room. The air inside felt even colder than before, thick with the scent of decay and something sharp, metallic. The shadows seemed darker, swallowing up the light, and she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. A whisper, so close she could feel it brush against her ear, said, "You can't leave." She spun around, but the room was empty. Still, she could feel the presence, the man in the shadows, watching her, his cold, dark gaze pinning her to the spot. "Maya," the voice hissed, deeper and more menacing this time. "Stay with me, forever." Panic surged through her, and she bolted from the room, her footsteps echoing as she fled down the hall. She burst into the main corridor, only to feel the temperature drop sharply as the lights dimmed again. The shadowy figure was there, standing at the far end, blocking her escape. Desperate, she remembered the note, the messages left by the previous patients. "Help me. He won't let me go." Summoning every ounce of courage, she faced the shadow. "Henry, you don't have to stay here. You're free. You can leave." The figure seemed to waver, as if her words had reached something within the darkness. For a moment the room grew warmer, and she felt the weight lifting, the oppressive energy dissipating. It was as if Henry had finally found peace. When the sun rose, the hospital felt different. The shadows seemed less heavy, the air lighter. Room 207 was empty, the door sealed shut, and Maya felt as if a terrible chapter had closed. As she left the hospital that morning, Maya felt a strange sense of relief, mixed with sadness for the souls trapped within the hospital's walls. But she knew one thing for sure: she would never return to Greenwood Memorial after that night. The voices in the shadows were finally at rest, but she would carry their memory forever. Brookfield Memorial Hospital stood tall and foreboding against the darkening sky, an ominous silhouette against a world slowly sinking into night. Emily clutched her bag and took a deep breath, glancing up at the towering concrete structure. The hospital wasn't like the gleaming new facility Shed imagined herself working in after nursing school. This one was old, with flickering lights and an unsettling faint smell of antiseptic that lingered everywhere, no matter how clean it appeared. Tonight was Emily's first shift working the graveyard hours, and though she tried to stay calm, she couldn't shake the chill of dread that had been building all week. Her friend Rachel had laughed off her nervousness at lunch that day. "Oh, don't worry, Em. It's not that scary," she said with a grin, as though reading Emily's mind. "Just try not to get lost, especially if you end up near Ward C." Ward C. Emily's curiosity got the better of her. What's so special about that? Rachel leaned closer, lowering her voice. It's the abandoned ward, 5th floor. They shut it down years ago. Supposedly, they kept the critical patients there during some flu epidemic, the ones who couldn't make it. Rachel's grin widened. People say it's haunted. Emily laughed, rolling her eyes, but the idea nagged at her. She shook it off, deciding it was just Rachel's way of spooking the new girl. Shed dealt with enough difficult patients and eerie night shifts during her internships to know it was just another hospital, like any other. Yet, as she clocked in and started her rounds, the air in Brookfield felt heavier, each step echoing down empty linoleum hallways as she moved from room to room. Around 2 a.m., Emily was returning from checking on a patient when she noticed something strange. The corridor stretched out in front of her, dimly lit and shadowed. She turned a corner and found herself at the base of a staircase she hadn't seen before. The steps were old, chipped, and worn. Above them, a small sign read, Ward C. Her heart skipped a beat. Rachel's words echoed in her mind. It's the abandoned ward, 5th floor. Emily felt a tug of curiosity. She glanced around, but the halls were silent, the other nurses busy elsewhere. Against her better judgment, she started up the stairs, her footsteps soft on the concrete steps. The air grew colder with each step, and the fluorescent lights grew dimmer. By the time she reached the 5th floor, she could barely see a few feet ahead of her. The doors to Ward C were slightly ajar, and she hesitated. She'd heard about places like this before, places in hospitals where things just felt wrong. But she couldn't resist. She pushed the doors open, her breath fogging in front of her as she stepped inside. Ward C was silent. The beds lay untouched, their sheets yellowed with age. The air smelled stale, a mix of mildew and something faintly metallic. Emily swallowed, feeling her throat tighten as she stepped further in. She told herself it was only her imagination, yet the shadows seemed to grow, shifting in the corners of her vision. Her heart began to pound as she noticed one bed that was different from the others. It was made up neatly, the sheets pristine and white. The bed frame glistened, as if it had just been cleaned. Slowly, Emily walked toward it. The air around the bed felt colder, and she saw what looked like a crumpled piece of paper on the pillow. With shaking hands, Emily picked it up and unfolded it. The note was scrawled in a hurried, messy script, as though the writer had been desperate to convey their message. The words sent a chill down her spine. Help me. I'm still here. Can't breathe. Can't leave. Emily froze, the note trembling in her fingers. The message was fresh new ink, new handwriting. She turned around, half expecting to see someone standing behind her. But the ward was silent. The empty beds lined up in quiet rows, the shadows pooling in the corners. Suddenly, the sound of coughing echoed down the hallway, faint but unmistakable. Emily's stomach twisted. She couldn't see anyone, but she could hear it deep, rattling breaths, desperate gasps, as if someone were struggling to breathe. The noise grew louder, and she turned, her heart pounding. The beds around her seemed to shift, their shadows stretching like reaching arms. She backed away, her eyes wide as she tried to find the exit, but no matter which way she turned, the doors were gone. All she could see were beds stretching endlessly, an ocean of silent, untouched linens and empty pillows. Emily. She whipped around, her blood running cold. There, at the far end of the ward, was a figure, a man in a hospital gown, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken and lifeless. His chest rose and fell with shallow, struggling breaths. "Please, help me," he rasped, his voice hoarse and barely audible. He took a step toward her, and she stumbled back, her pulse racing. I don't know how to help you," she stammered, backing away. But the man's gaze was fixed on her, his eyes dark and hollow, filled with a desperate, pleading look. "You have to help us," he whispered, his voice echoing in the stillness. We can't leave. We can't leave until someone helps us." Emily turned and ran, her footsteps echoing through the ward as she dashed between the beds, her mind racing with panic. The air grew colder, and she could feel the presence of others, more figures, more shadowy shapes in the corners of her vision. Whispers filled the air, voices overlapping in a haunting chorus of pleas and cries for help. She finally found the doors, shoving them open and stumbling back into the stairwell. She ran down the steps, her breath coming in gasps, her heart pounding as she made her way back to the main floor. She didn't stop until she was back in the brightly lit hallway, the familiar sounds of the hospital buzzing around her. But the feeling didn't leave her. She could still feel the cold, the weight of those desperate haunted eyes watching her, following her. She glanced down at her hand, realizing she was still clutching the note. The words seemed darker now, the ink smudged as though it had bled through the paper. Her fingers shook as she tried to understand what she had just seen, what she had just experienced. She had heard the stories, but she never thought they were real. Ward C was supposed to be abandoned, shut down after that epidemic years ago. But the figures, the whispers, they were real. And as she stared down at the note, she understood the terrible truth. They were still there, trapped, unable to leave. As Emily's shift came to an end, she left the hospital in a daze, the note clutched tightly in her hand. She didn't tell anyone what she had seen, afraid they wouldn't believe her. But she knew one thing for certain: she would never return to Ward C again. Yet, as she walked away from the hospital, a single thought echoed in her mind. What if they never left? Maria had been a nurse at Mercy Hospital for over a year, but this was her first time working the night shift. Her usual shift was during the day, when the hospital was busy and bustling with doctors, nurses, and patients moving around everywhere. But the night shift? The night shift was different. She had heard stories about the hospital at night. There were rumors that certain parts of the building, especially the older wings, were haunted. Some of the nurses said they had seen strange shadows in the hallways or heard whispers when no one was around. Others talked about the hospital's ghost wing, Ward D. Ward D was a section of the hospital that had been shut down years ago. It was located on the 4th floor, and no one was allowed to go there anymore. The wing was old, falling apart, and some said it was cursed. Maria didn't believe in curses or ghosts, but she felt a little uneasy as she started her first night shift. Her friend Tom, another nurse, tried to reassure her before her shift started. "It's not so bad," he said with a smile. "The hospital's pretty quiet at night. Just stick to your rounds and don't go wandering off, especially not to Ward D." Maria laughed nervously. "Why does everyone talk about Ward D like it's some kind of haunted house?" Tom shrugged. "People say it's haunted because weird things happened there, a long time ago. Some patients died mysteriously in Ward D. People said they saw strange things like shadows, or heard crying when the floor was supposed to be empty. Then they closed it down and never reopened it." Maria rolled her eyes. "You're just trying to scare me." Tom raised his hands in surrender. "I'm just saying, it's better to stay away. Nothing good ever happens up there." As her shift started, Maria focused on her tasks, telling herself that there was nothing to worry about. The hospital was quiet, just as Tom had said. She walked down the long, empty hallways, checking on her assigned patients. She tried to ignore the way the hospital's fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed, creating shadows that danced on the walls. It was almost midnight when she finished checking her last patient. She glanced at her watch, relieved that half of her shift was already over. She was heading back to the nurse's station to rest when she heard something strange. It was a faint sound, barely audible, like someone crying. Maria paused, looking around the empty hallway. She listened closely, trying to find where the sound was coming from. It seemed to echo down the hall and up the stairwell. The sound was coming from above her from the 4th floor. Ward D. Mariah's heart began to beat faster. She knew she shouldn't go up there. It was forbidden, and besides, she didn't believe in ghosts. But what if someone needed help? What if it was an elderly patient or someone who got lost? She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, and walked toward the stairs. As she climbed the steps, the crying grew louder, a soft, pitiful sound that sent chills down her spine. She reached the 4th floor and hesitated at the entrance to Ward D. The door was old and heavy with a sign that read, "Do not enter." Maria knew she should turn back, but her curiosity got the best of her. Slowly, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The hallway of Ward D was dark and cold. It looked very different from the rest of the hospital, older, with peeling paint on the walls and broken tiles on the floor. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been touched in years. The crying sound was clearer now, coming from one of the rooms down the hall. Maria walked forward, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. She passed by rooms that were filled with old hospital beds, broken chairs, and dusty medical equipment. It looked as though everyone had left in a hurry, leaving everything behind. As she moved deeper into the ward, she noticed something strange. The walls seemed to have faint handprints, as if someone had pressed their hands against the wall over and over. The handprints were dark, almost like stains, and they made Maria feel uneasy. Finally, she reached the room where the crying was coming from. The door was slightly open, and she could see a figure sitting on the bed, hunched over, shoulders shaking with sobs. Maria swallowed hard and knocked gently on the door. "Hello? Are you okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't respond. Maria took a step closer, trying to get a better look. It was a woman, dressed in a faded hospital gown, her hair long and tangled, covering her face. She looked frail, as though she had been there for a very long time. "Mom, do you need help?" Maria asked again, her voice shaking. The woman slowly lifted her head, and Maria felt a wave of terror wash over her. The woman's face was pale, almost ghostly white, with dark, sunken eyes that seemed hollow. Her mouth opened slightly, and a raspy whisper escaped her lips. "Help me, please." Maria took a step back, her heart racing. The woman's eyes were fixed on her, pleading, desperate. Maria wanted to run, but something held her in place. She felt an overwhelming sadness, as though the woman's pain was reaching out to her, pulling her in. "Help me," the woman repeated, her voice trembling. Maria's instincts kicked in. "What happened to you? How did you get here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she lifted a thin, bony hand and pointed to the corner of the room. Maria turned, following the woman's gaze, and saw something that made her blood run cold. In the corner of the room was a shadow, a tall, dark figure with no face, just an empty black void where a face should have been. The figure seemed to shift and waver, as if it were made of smoke, but its presence felt heavy, almost suffocating. Maria backed away, her body frozen with fear. She turned to the woman, who was now staring at the shadow, her eyes wide with terror. "It won't let me leave," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "It keeps us here forever." Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered and went out, plunging everything into darkness. Maria felt a cold hand grab her arm, the fingers digging into her skin with an icy grip. She gasped, trying to pull away, but the grip tightened. In the darkness, she heard voices, whispers echoing all around her. She could make out faint words, fragments of sentences. "Help us. Don't leave. Please, don't forget us." The voices grew louder, overlapping, filling the room with a haunting chorus of pleas. Maria struggled, trying to break free from the icy grip, but it was as if the shadows themselves were holding her in place. Just as suddenly as it started, the lights flickered back on. Maria blinked, her vision clearing, and found herself alone in the room. The woman was gone, and the shadowy figure had disappeared. The only sound was her own ragged breathing, echoing in the silent room. She looked down at her arm, where the woman's hand had grabbed her, and saw faint, dark bruises in the shape of fingers. Her skin was cold, and the bruises stung, a painful reminder that what she had seen was real. Heart pounding, Maria stumbled out of the room and ran down the hallway, desperate to escape Ward D. She pushed open the door to the stairwell and practically flew down the steps, not stopping until she was back on the main floor, surrounded by the bright, familiar lights of the hospital. She leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath, her mind racing with what she had just experienced. She knew no one would believe her. How could she explain what she had seen, the woman, the shadow? They were real, yet they were trapped, bound to that forgotten part of the hospital. As her shift finally ended, Maria left the hospital without a word to anyone. But the memory of that night stayed with her, haunting her dreams, filling her thoughts. She could still hear the whispers, the desperate pleas of the souls trapped in Ward D. A week later, Maria quit her job at Mercy Hospital. She couldn't go back, not after what she had seen. But as she packed up her belongings, she noticed something that sent a chill down her spine. On her arm, where the bruises had been, There was now a faint, dark marking imprint of a hand, as though someone had held onto her, someone who wasn't ready to let go.